제가 아침에 전에 아이를 있겠지만 시간 좀 일찍 나오고 하는 말씀을 아이를 전화만 하는 마음에 다 현대무용 30년 기념축제가 11월 15일부터 이루어졌었는데 갈라 춤잔치서부터 또 유관순 무용전 60년대부터 최근에 이르는 작품들로 쭉 좋은 작품들이 쭉 선보이게 되었고, 또 문예관 소극장에서는 젊은 무용가 구인전이 이루어졌었죠. 또 어제 그제 이틀간 슈퍼스타 예수 그리스도 공연이 끝났습니다. 오늘 행사는 바로 이 같은 우리 유관 선생님 바로 1963년대 시작됐는데, 이화여대 중심으로 해서 국내에 보급하기 시작했던 미국의 현대무용이 사실 우리 현대무용사로 이어졌고, 또 그런 노력과 시도가 또 한국의 현대무용사 중에서 후반기를 가장 화려하게 장식해 주었습니다. 사실 현대무용 역사 그러면은 30년은 아니죠. 60년 정도라고 생각되는데, 지금 이번에 행사는 그 전반부가 아니라 후반기 30년을 그런 화려한 장식을 해준 여러분들의 그 최근에 이루어지고 있는 우리 현대무용은 바로 미국의 현대무용이 우리나라에 들어와서 지금 이같이 발전되어 있는 그런 것을 중점으로 해서 행사를 벌게 되었습니다. 비록 짧지만 굵게 이어져 내려온 우리 한국의 현대무용이 동양인의 의식구조상 다시 태어나는 그런 시기를 맞이하게 됐고, 또 바로 그런 시점에서 한국 현대무용 30년 기념축제가 마련되었습니다. 이 축제의 가장 마지막을 장식하는 바로 오늘 현대무용국제세미나까지 이르게 된 것을 무척 기쁘게 생각하면서 이 세미나에 참석해 주신 두 분, 패트리시아 로 박사님과 또 제누베아브 오스왈드 박사님께 감사의 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 두 분 우선 간단한 양력을 말씀드릴게요. 패트리시아 로 박사님은 지금 현재 뉴욕 대학교에서 강의를 계속하고 계시고, 여러분들이 갖고 계신 유인물에 자세하게 기록이 되어 있습니다. 주누비에브 오스왈드 박사님은 세계 지금 무용예술총연맹의 위원장으로 활약하고 계시고요. 노스캐롤라이나 대학, 또 줄리아드 뉴욕 대학, 컬럼비아 대학에서 공부를 하셨고, 또 지금 저서로서는 무용자료사전 명부 기획국장, 무용인명록 기획국장으로, 또 인간연구 편집 부국장 외 다수의 작품들이 있습니다. 그럼 먼저 오늘 앞부분에는 패트리시아 닥터 로께서 먼저 강의를 해주시겠습니다. 타이틀은 대학으로 가는 무용이 되겠고요. 두 번째 강의 오스왈드 박사님께서는 폴 테일러 머스커니안과 트리샤 브라운의 작품에서 본 현대무용의 변화, 변형 및 부활에 대해서 강의를 해주시겠습니다.
Much to my displeasure. I bring my own and personal greetings from Professor Robert Sirota, Chairman of the New York University's Department of Music and Performing Arts Professions, the NYU School of Education of New York University, and from the NYU Alumni Association, to Professor Won Soon-yuk and Myung-suk Park. Distinguished Korean national, I call her national treasure. Now I know this is not accurate, and I understand that. But I think in the future, this area will be recognized in a different way. So I I'd make a suggestion to your country at some point, but I know it's not totally legal. To honored guests, to the President, Myung-suk, the Executive Committee and Executive Extensive Membership of the 30th anniversary of the American Modern Dance in Korea, to my NYU alumni, those here and those who could not come, to all gathered here at this special occasion. I'm honored to have been invited from the United States to be with you during these special festivals because Korea is the only other country, or the only country other than America, that I've been in 3 different times, and I treasure my visits here. Although I'm still unable to speak your native language, I feel very much at home here because many of my former students live among you and are here sharing this auspicious occasion. Within South Korea, I've been almost to the top of your country and as far south as Busan, your second largest city. I've driven through and visited several cities outside of this huge and fascinating capital of Seoul. Because I sat in your Olympic Stadium during the night of the pre-Olympics in 1989, then back at home in New York City the very next day, where I watched the ensuing Olympics on television, it felt as though I was still sitting in that stadium, watching with you, cheering for you and for America as well. In the statements that I share with you today, I wish you, all of you, to know that I have the highest regard for your Korean dancers, whether they're traditional, modern, ballet, all of them. You have a real talent here. I will say to you, if you can follow me a second, it's very difficult for me to read a speech and not say things on the side. And so if the interpreter is needed, wave your hand and I'll point to her. I don't know whether you need to say that.
지금 그 번역문에서 빠진 부분들이 아마 언급될 것 같습니다. 그래서 그런 부분이 나올 때 혹시 통역을 원하시면 그때 손을 들어주시면 제가 그 방금 말씀하신 것에 대해서 통역을 해드리겠습니다.
I'm appreciative of your warmth, sincerity, humility, diligence, artistry, and great love for making dances. For making dance a recognized creative activity that lends aesthetic value to the lives of all who experience it as participants and observers. Thank you for permitting me to come to celebrate with you on this anniversary of 30 years of American modern dance in Korea. I extend my warmest congratulations to Won Seung-yuk for her noble efforts in bringing Western modern dance to Korea, for sharing its merits with her peers and students and raising its earliest forms to the level of an art form. I now refer to what I've called Dance Goes to College, degrees of distinction. Often there are jokes about the provinciality of Americans who lived in New England or in New York City almost all of their lives. To them, Western USA means on the western side of the Hudson River, which is, of course, still very much in eastern USA. It means within the state of New York on the western side of the island of Manhattan, whose spectacular multi-shaped skyline is visible from the shores of other boroughs of New York City and portions of New Jersey and Connecticut, that also border on the eastern edge of the Atlantic Ocean. To make certain that the accolades that I share with you today about your right to be proud of the truly fantastic dance accomplishments made here in 30 years, as compared with American dance events in the past 50 years, are not seen through myopic provincial lenses, I shall start this paper with a succinct comparative lesson in United States versus Korean choreography. For How else can we start with the critical understanding needed for grasping Korea's comparative accomplishments with those of the United States within roughly the same time period? The physical differences in each of our land's width, length, and population densities will help to explain wherein we can differ radically, yet at the same time have the basis for comprehending and eventually sharing many of the same educational, philosophical, and theoretical views on the arts, performing and visual, that I am asking you to imagine on this occasion. In the following quick geographical tour, bear in mind that the borders of all countries are ragged and irregular. Thus, the figures I share with you are close approximations rather than actual distances. If you would refer to the figure that is a page or two on as we talk. It's, I think, on page 4. Analysis of the figure data. In terms of physical distances by car, a full driving day can provide access to any east-west coastal location in South Korea. Now, I may change my mind after today and yesterday. I was unaware of the traffic jams that you have, so it does take longer to go from east to west. In terms of miles, what I'm doing is averaging 60 miles an hour and saying you can cover this distance. Similarly, one day's travel accesses any north-south locale in Korea as compared to 3.5 days to cover the full distance north to south in the United States. There is no doubt the vast diversity in educational and professional studio models that arose in the past years in the USA were due to a continued diversity of purpose, programs, student background and sophistication, as well as degrees of freedom in decision-making made available in the dance administrator and teaching faculty. Before, during, and after the high expansionist period of the 1970s, the performing arts in higher education, in private institutions, and I give examples of some institutions that some of you may have visited or may know of. These are not all of them. Goucher, Mills, there's a Mills in New York, there's a Mills College in California. Teachers College, NYU, the New England 5 college programs, Boston Conservatory, Southern Methodist University, Bates College, University of Southern California, Brigham Young University, Chicago, Kent State, Ohio State, Princeton, Maryland, Stanford University. These are all private universities. They continue to reflect direct responses to the special needs of their variable student populations. In my analysis of the chart, I skipped over the fact that it takes 7, close to 8 full days to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific driving, 7 days to go one direction. And that's really pushing 65 miles an hour in an 8-hour day. Strategic versus short-term planning. True to the international reputation of Americans, who are best known for being individualists, American modern dancers tend to be short-term planners, much to the bane of their own development and acceptance by large populations of people. The theaters they present modern dance creations in rarely match the size of the houses that fill for ballet. Although New York City's population exceeds 13 million, this is excess of 2 million. It says 2 million down here, that means greater than 2 million, but actually New York is 13 million, as opposed to Korea, which is known to be 9+ million. We're looking at two cities that are very comparable in many ways. New York is a little bit larger, but Seoul is incredibly large. And that's the point I'm making here for you to understand why modern dance has been able to do what it has done with the leadership that it's had in the city of Seoul and in the country of Korea. It is quite incredible. But there are some reasons why the diversity of the other modern dance people have not filtered in, and that's what I want you to remember in terms of your history. It is different from the United States. Although New York City's population exceeds 13 million, as does Seoul's excess 2 million, 9 million, Busan's over 2 million, and that of Los Angeles, again, comparable to the New York area, smaller followings from new American modern dancers can be attributed to the proliferation of such artists competing for the attention of audiences who prefer tradition. Or the smaller theaters that they are able to fill are attributed to the attendance of their own students and peers. I'm on page 5. With whom they have danced faithful, but usually small, for faithful, but usually small, select audiences. The Loft studio presentations that survived almost a decade in the late 1960s to mid-1970s were an American phenomenon that was not known for expanding the consciousness of uninitiated audiences. The audiences were too small, few people saw what they were doing, therefore the large population of the country knew very little about what they were doing. Rather, their followings were cultish in nature. Koreans plan strategically. On the other hand, strategically oriented Koreans are known to work carefully at seeking out their potential audiences, carefully following the precepts established by Martha Graham, full stage effects, sizable performing groups, and live musical play best in the large concert halls. The events in the last 2 evenings prove that to me. I have yet to see a modern dance production in a hall that size recently. City Center matches it to some extent, Lincoln Center to some extent, but those are very hard houses to rent. They're expensive, they're difficult for modern dancers to go to. Successful theatrical events require such strategic planning. And from a review of the chronology of Professor Yuk's creative output, she is a master at exhibiting her creations in larger cities, where greater visibility becomes the announcement for future appearances. Now, this is true in the United States, where her presentation in Los Angeles was to a large audience. And so the more people who see an event, the more can talk about it and discuss its impact in an area. It occurs to me that the boldness of Wonsoon's fostering of Western modern dance in Korea was effective. 1, for its timeliness. The country was ready for some innovation. 2, for the dance form's own natural Oriental borrowings through Ruth St. Denis, Graham's early experiences with the East, and 3, as a result of the combination of her convincing fascination with a style that produced a bonding with a large number of Iwa students who were first students in her classes, then selected members of her performing group. News of her successes spread rapidly within the capital city, and because there were not other modern dance styles at the time with which to contend or to offer as alternatives. Furthermore, in thinking of Professor Yuk, one of Hanya Holmes' favorite analogies seems to be pertinent. According to Holm, focusing on the person is like a fine point, an inner person. This inner person is like the center of a hurricane. The secret of a hurricane is its eye. Its eye is calm. If you destroy that eye, you destroy the hurricane. If you can't be as calm as the eye of the hurricane, which holds all the answers to the devastating storm of the outside, you can't hold yourself up in the world of the dilemma and the battle. There is no force that does not come from an utter calm, sensitivity. The power to absorb, to register, is the calm of the eye which starts that outer passion and tremor. There is little doubt that one soon knows her center. Types of American institutions, small and private. The dance that was taught in education at the turn of the century and somewhat beyond the development by Margaret Dobler at the first dance major in the University of Wisconsin was best characterized by its constant name changes. Natural dance, expressive dance, aesthetic dance, modern dance, lately contemporary, and other names. Under the direction of Melvin Ballou Gilbert, Harvard's Bulletin ran its aesthetic dance with the same prestige as its courses in Greek and Latin for the century's first decade. A highly popular course for teachers during summers, the course set the pace for many of the first dance offerings in programs in physical education. Not for men, but for women. So from Harvard, a male school, we go to physical education and dance for women. Dance for everyone. In 1982, dance critic Walter Terry wrote the following excerpts in his full article entitled Dance and Education, a Reflection, an Appreciation, in honor of NYU's School of Education's celebration of its benchmark programs of 50 years of dance in higher education. That was 10 years ago. In 1905, close to 10, three pioneers of dance and education pressed for new standards in art and education. The message was communication and enlightenment through dance. Isadora Duncan, Ruth St. Denis, Elizabeth Birchinall. Most of you know of the first two. Great modern dancers and great educators who taught dance in their own studios and as guests in their other institutions throughout their careers. Less known is Elizabeth Birchinall, who can be considered America's first great folk dance authority. Through her efforts at Teachers College, today of Columbia University, she opened the doors of education to dance by including folk dance in her physical education classes. As the early modern dancers recognized the importance of the functions of human anatomy, kinesiology, and the understanding of the dance, they also realized that their new, more physically initiated techniques could serve as educational tools. From this realization, college physical education departments provided trained modern dancers with a security they could never find within their own right. Stark and often cerebral art forms in the theater climate of the 1920s, 1930s, and even 1940s. And that was Walter Terry. Public and sometimes free institutions of higher education. Pre-baccalaureate dance models continued throughout the 1940s, either as a part of the major program in physical education. Now here's some names you may or may not have heard of. Sargent College, Bouvet Boston School, I went there. Or as a performing arts training program, Juilliard, School of Music, and others, which did not offer the requisite 4 years of earning a baccalaureate degree. Earliest graduates of these programs did not earn a full degree. They gained a certificate. I think that pattern was evident here in some places. By the 1950s, in their clamor for educating their own residents within state, California, New York, several other states, built on an average of 5 new community or junior colleges annually. That's a lot of schools being built. I'm now on page 8. Their objectives was to encourage those who took advantage of a less costly 2-year education, the resultant AA degree, to continue their studies in one of their state-sponsored 4-year institutions, which many communities and colleges had established, with which they had established articulation agreements. State schools refer to higher education institutions funded by taxpayer dollars and fully or partially subsidized through state bond offerings and other means of state allocations. Schools such as City University of New York, which began in 1851, with its 15 or more branch locations still in the city of New York, SUNY, State University of New York, University of California, which was private, and there is a state one also, University of Colorado. These systems favor U.S. citizens. If an international student attempts to go there, you are charged as out-of-staters are. It's not free education fully. So for residents, it's free. For others, the cost is added. How dance was introduced in the varied institutional types. With the establishment of undergraduate baccalaureate degree programs in physical education for women, some private, some state institutions, dance infiltrated as a special subject matter in accordance with the local aesthetic of the time period. For example, where religion or ethnic origin played a strong role in the community in the education of children and the young, adults, indigenous, and religious-based forms of dance were taught. As a core part of the physical education subject matter, so-called folk, national dances offered as a form of recreational dance in a majority of these programs. These were not dance majors. These were dance being offered in the school programs. For instance, one found line dance, contra dance, circle dances, quadrilles, and square dances in highly developed forms throughout such programs in the New England states. In the Appalachian states, in the South, one found rather long ways, Kentucky running sets, clogging, very different kinds of expression of the people who lived in the locale. In the far west, where much of the migration of original U.S. settlers going out for gold had fused, variations of these forms appeared in Texas, California, filtered into their programs. By the 1940s, tap was taught in almost every program because it was one of the first major forms to be mass communicated through the film industry for pre-talkies in the 1940s. Private versus public institutions. Much of the curricula and innovative regional links are due to the creative efforts of individuals with firm beliefs about improving education. A majority of their efforts can be found in the archives of private, early established elite institutions. Smith College, Mount Holyoke, Cornish School in the far west, Reed College in Oregon, Vassar Ballet at the University of Indiana, at Boston Conservatory in Massachusetts, at UC Irvine in California, Pembroke, Radcliffe, Wellesley, Bryn Mawr, Bennington, later Hampshire College, and the names of the colleges that are private go on, and they have their unique kinds of identity, just as Iwa and your other colleges within Seoul. I learned yesterday that there are 20 colleges that offer dance in Seoul. So each one of those has a slight unique difference between each of the others. That should be. It absolutely should be. It should not be a homogenized way of offering dance. So I agree with what's happened here. Add to these the influence of special summer camp programs. Colorado Springs with Hanya Home, Interlochen in Michigan, UCLA, USDAN in New York, Bennington, where Martha Hill and others and many of the early dancers taught classes, Perry Mansfield, Holmes program, New London, Connecticut for some 26 or 7 years, offered summer dance festivals with all of the artists. Eleanor Matheny and Lois Elfelt at University of California, Ruth Beckford in Black Dance in California, Lester Horton, Bella Lewitsky in California, Long Beach Summer Program, etc. It would be 3 lectures to even touch this material, but I put the names down because some of you may be curious about it and want to follow up on it. Ewha Women's University and several others whose name I fail to recall established strong programs of a similar purpose in Korea within the last 30 years. Several male private institutions emerged at varying times to become known for their own encouragement in the United States of a special non-major dance programs. They were special because they did not fit into the typical physical education for women only model. Harvard was the one mentioned earlier, but others included Springfield College, where Ted Shawn taught a number of years and his Dance for Men was nurtured very strongly. But others were also, or still are, Antioch, Duke, where some of you understand there were at least some 60 of you who were at Duke University at least a summer ago. So you've already found its location. All of the subject of a paper in itself. Dance for Everyone, the creative teacher. For the professional educator to teach creatively implies a constant renewal, a response to an ever-changing world, a focus on the subject of teaching learners, each one deserving of and requiring an individual mentoring attention that parallels their unique learning style. No 2 students are alike in the content and the subject matter. Dance, dancing, the dance, evolves as well. A former NYU colleague in dance, Associate Professor Judith Schwartz, summed up her views on the creative dance in her lecture in 1987, Pioneers of Dance Conferences, which I organized and directed. This was her statement. The creative process allows and encourages children from early childhood to adulthood to find, test, reject, reassemble, and finally succeed in developing different and unique approaches to problem solving. Not only do they find inventive and original ways for the expression, just as importantly, they experience the challenge, discipline, stimulation, and satisfaction of completing the task at hand. Dance is universal. Dance can be understood, appreciated, and enjoyed at various levels of sophistication. It is our responsibility to raise and broaden the level of sophistication of dance students, helping them to encompass the many tiers of understanding necessary to gain the technical and choreographic knowledge and appreciation that will lead to a higher level of aesthetic awareness and judgment. These will then grow and serve them throughout their adult life, contributing to an enriching or an enriched lifestyle. The earliest dance colleges with major instruction. For those unfamiliar with the pre-1950s leadership in physical education and dance that initiated dance courses and majors, I recommend the, quote, uncharted development section of Alma Hawkins' book entitled Modern Dance in Higher Education. That out-of-print book was reprinted in 1982 as a Cord Dance Research Special. The author's new preface, this is Hawkins, broadly fills the 1950 to 80 gap in educational dance history. Dance educators remain particularly grateful to Dobler's efforts and success by 1926 for having incorporated both creative and scientific study into the preparation of teachers of dance. The infusion of anatomical study of the human body being accounted for, or it accounted for the persistence of the Bachelor of Science degree titles for many undergraduate preparations into the present time. I understand that's a partial controversy here in your programs as well. The 1950s and 60s account for the break for having to call dance, and I have it down wrong, rhythmic dance. I wish it had been called creative dance. It was called rhythmic dance because boys were not supposed to like dance, that sissy activity called dance. I understand you have that problem as well as we. If the world could ever change its view, it would show that it's grown up. Masterful designs were created for early childhood education that mirrored the philosophies of John Dewey, Margaret Dobler, and their literature is at risk today because much of it is out of print and unknown by younger students. Past and current programs initiated by leaders such as Elizabeth Hayes, run by feisty believers such as Virginia Tanner, Shirley Ryrie, Joan Woodbury, Nick and Murray I put down as abbreviations, Nikolai and Murray Lewis, Ruth Murray, Andrews and Fleming, Jacques d'Amboise, numerous unsung pioneers, Catherine Dunham, Pearl Primus, Arthur Mitchell, Alvin Ailey, Elliot Feld, have all helped to initiate the professional artist branch of the accrediting body of the National Association of Schools of Dance, now in its 10th year, which leads to either dance studio or institutes of higher education accreditation. They're both recognized by the same group. That is a model which you could take in this country and accept as a model for yourselves. It brings the sometimes two groups that are often looked at as differing groups, the professional group, the group that is performing on stage, with the educational group. It brings the two under the same aegis, and the review group accredits both of those groups. So the philosophies are much closer and much more important. I will do the beginning part here and then skip this part because I know my colleague is getting anxious. Sources for the publication of dance information, data, research, and theories. Far from being presented as a definitive list of USA publications on the diverse subject matter of the dance, the following random titles are intended to illustrate the typical patterns of professional dance organizations and the limits of their publication runs. Whereas some publications disappeared in less than a year or so, one was called The Feet, in less than a year or so, others have survived from 10 to 15 years or more. The average is 10 to 15 years. The rare ones that last longer or have survived, for example, the Dance Magazine, may be single-family owned, they may be subsidized by outside groups and therefore are able to survive. Or they enjoy a not-for-profit status because of their large numbers of faithful subscribers to annual memberships in allied professional organizations. One good example of that is the American Society for Aesthetics, which produces the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. And it's been going for a long time, and it was only 2 years ago in which they raised their subscribers' rate 4 times a year from $15 to now about $25. So it's been incredibly faithful to the field. Viltus, Impulse, I'm just reading the names as I go down. You can read these. Viltus was a very early folk dance magazine, and Viltus himself, or the originator of it, was the one who edited it. If you get a chance to, you will find many things that you can draw upon from your whole field of your indigenous dances, and you'll see ways in which you can talk about your own forms. This was a very important magazine. Chord Newsletter is now gone. Dance Chronicle still exists. Performing Arts Journal, very much alive. Dance Observer was Louis Horst's publication. If you're unfamiliar with it, you can get hold of it, read it. You get a sense of how things begin. Same thing with the other one. Spotlight on Dance is AHPERD, American Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. Dance Research Annual, Dance Research Journal is still in existence, etc. So I skip that page and go to page 14. The development of peripheral arts organizations. Page 14. Increasing numbers of prestigious statesmen. Yes, in this publication, all male. Businessmen, educators, and the arts were cited in a 1988 meeting of the American Council for the Arts, indicative of the quality of their leadership at a time when the American government was moving in the opposite direction toward withdrawal of fiscal support of the arts. Are selected statements offered in 1988 by the then president of New York University, John Bradamus. His initial statement is particularly noteworthy. Legislation creating the National Endowment for the Arts and its companion, the National Endowment for the Humanities, was probably the single most important measure ever enacted in our country in support of the life and mind of the imagination. The law establishing two endowments puts the case succinctly. Quote, "It is necessary and appropriate for the federal government to help create and sustain not only a climate encouraging freedom of thought, imagination, and inquiry, but also the material conditions facilitating the release of this creative talent." You have in your country cultural groups that are very supportive of the arts. Encourage them. Let them know you are appreciative. They do not necessarily continue. Let them know you want them to be here. And congratulate them for being helpful to you. Proof of the impact and timeliness of the endowment are found in the following facts. In 1965, when the Arts Endowment was created, there were relatively few professional, non-profit performing arts organizations in the United States, in so large a country as ours. There were some 27 opera companies, 58 orchestras, 22 professional theaters, and 37 dance companies. The Harris poll shows a slight decrease in the arts attendance in 1984. It must be obvious, however, that the arts and culture generally in the United States, stimulated by an enlightened policy on the part of the National Endowment, blossomed and flourished until 1965. Although Americans contributed a record number of dollars to nonprofit organizations, in 1987, the rate of growth of charitable giving from 1986 to 87 was the lowest in 12 years. Things do not necessarily continue, and your external funding is extremely important. It is the arts that celebrate the vast and manifold talents of Americans and bind us together as a people. Historian Schlesinger Jr. said, "If history tells us anything, it tells us that the United States, like all other nations, will be measured in the eyes of posterity not by economic power or military might, but by its character and achievements as a civilization. The arts are essential. The arts are not something to be thrown a bone after everything else is taken care of, because everything else will ever be taken care of. Arts groups in New York City, for example, generate 6 billion in goods and services annually. You may need to talk about that, the fact that the arts are productive as well. The current range, liberal arts and conservatory types, skip. Read it, please. Thank you. Page 16. Page 16. What is terminal? Just above that, As in the past, dance degrees and programs are now undergoing dramatic transitions between both private and restrictive state institutions. To a lesser extent, the arts of drama, visual art, music, and even the traditional higher education subjects of religion, mathematics, philosophy, and the social sciences are experiencing similar restraints. American education is in its moment of shrinking in many ways. You are in the opposite realm. You are expanding. Learn what you can from what is happening to us. Because while you expand, ultimately the accordion must be pressed together again. We are in the reduction period. What is terminal? Terminal possesses a meaning of standards only after the content of the term has been identified. Certification for teaching dance applies only to states where a legislature created the statutes for it and had them voted through by the voting public. Temporary certification is impermanent and it requires the appropriate baccalaureate degree. 30 additional graduate level points or a master's degree are needed to secure permanent certification. Certification is not a requisite for teaching on a college or university level. Accreditation pertains to professional association and state board of education standards for the undergraduate or graduate degrees being granted. The Master of Fine Arts are viewed, the BFA and the MFA are viewed by many as terminal degrees for performers and choreographers. That premise breaks down when the dance major department plans to grant degrees of higher education, in which their faculty members don't have the higher degree. The EDD is a traditional teaching degree. The Doctor of Arts is for the practicing master choreographer or performer. The PhD is for the theoretician, researcher, new writer, etc. None of these models are pure, for there are almost as many variations as there are institutions of higher education that offer graduate degrees. If you will, the scope of dance concentration during the 1960s to early 1980s expansionist period of programmatic diversification. If you look down at the insert part, I'm trying to move a little bit faster here. If you look at the insert part, you would see our program at New York University when it was in the 70s to the 80s. And this program is quite unique. There is no other model throughout the country. It had more diversity than any other program, and I show it to you because it's one to look to. I do not encourage all colleges to attempt to take on all of these diversities. But if you have students in your college who are bright, love to write, who are experienced in the area of seeing and know the kind of thing they want to talk about, perhaps a program in one institution could be criticism and writing or history. Another one might take on another one of these models. We were fortunate at New York University at that time period to have accessible to us large numbers of professional performers coming back to be educated, at the same time younger people who had been educated and wanted to know what being a professional was like. And so the two came together in a very exciting way. This is the extent of the program that we actually had. We still offer all of these courses, and one could still do any one of these, but you can't do it under the specific title of it. What we now offer is a program called Dance and Dance Education, but then it covers K through 12, and it also covers higher education in its totality. I'd like you to jump to page 18. In the middle, we talk about as professional organizations were formed and expanded. Now, this is AHPERD you're familiar with, the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, because it has dance with it. National Dance Guild, the American Dance Guild currently called, is another one of them. The organizations of CORD, the Congress on Research in Dance, is another one. The Dance Critics Association, the American Dance Scholars, most recently the American Dance Alliance. Corner the lady in red and ask her about it. She's its president. So organizations continue to be developed. To know the recipients alone is to recognize the diversity and expanding breadth of development in the field of dance through 50 years of both very difficult and highly supportive fiscal years of dance change. The breadth of purpose for which the awards made by the American Dance Guild tells another part of the field's increasing sophistication, well beyond that of mere entertainment. And I won't read these, but I point out again, the first recipient is none other than the lady in red. And it was in the early development of the National Dance Guild at that time, and she was recognized for her connection with a meeting that was going on at the time whose subject matter was education and aesthetic awareness, and they recognized her at that time. If you read the other names, you'll see some that are familiar. If you don't know the others, familiarize yourself with them. They're part of your dance background. The topics themselves are worth looking at. You see professional dancers listed, you see writers, you see educators, and it's a very impressive list.
지금 28페이지 ADG상 수상자들 보고 계십니다.
Now I turn to my conclusions. I know that you are versatile in your reading abilities in English, and I know you can read the remainder that I haven't been able to get to. So I do want to give my conclusions.
이제 결론입니다. 30페이지요.
Page 20, is that true? Is yours page 20?
I'm telling them.
Oh, 30, okay, good. At NYU's celebration of 50 years of dance in higher education 10 years ago, I made the following comment. The beginning of the 1950s marked a time in American history when the majority of the population converged upon crossroads of contemporary life in an economic encounter that threatened and continues to threaten the survival of creative, artistic, and educational development. Dance in higher education verged, and still verges, on new crossroads in its latest attempts to close a communication gap, testing the value of dance literacy. Dance, facing provincial crises with passings of its pioneers, is more a perception than a reality. I refer to passing of pioneers, the professional dancers, who are gradually reaching their upper senior years. We have lost Martha Graham. We have lost others of whom you know. There are some educators who have chaired departments and programs that have been very instrumental in their development and nurturing of dance for a long period of time. Some of those people have already reached retirement years. Lois Elfelt left some 7 or 8 years ago. Eleanor Matheny died. UC, University of California, lost its dance for a period of some 6 years. That's a great threat to what happens in terms of future dancers, future students who are in the program, freshmen expecting to go on and finish their degrees. We must help one another to keep such programs going in whatever way we can. The survival of dance cannot depend alone on whom and what has passed, but on the vision of current and new professionals who have learned great lessons from predecessors, from their mentors, and who will be able to apply those lessons to their own creative contributions that are both timely and appropriate for their own eras. As forthcoming innovators in professional dance, the increasingly recognized professionals of dance in higher education say, no problem. There isn't a problem. Innovators are known for their zeal, their ability to chart new routes for carrying out emergent philosophies. No one has to give them the map. As time verges on the 21st century, artists and educators alike are more comfortable with the fact that chaos, problem solving, and change simply help to define their fields. My final conclusion involves two borrowed quotations. If we are indifferent to the art of dancing, we have failed to understand not merely the supreme manifestation of physical life, but also the supreme symbol of spiritual life. I quote Havelock Ellis. If you've not read him, read him. In the words of one of the greatest American presidents, FDR or F.D. Roosevelt, the people of this country know that art is not a past treasure, an importation from another land, but part of the present life of all of the living and creating peoples. The bibliography you can read. Thank you. And Genevieve.
지금 내용에 대해서 질문 있으신 분은 좀 자유롭게 질문해 주시기 바랍니다.
We'll be having a short question and answer session first for her speech.
원래는 쉬는 시간이 있었는데 늦게 시작한 관계로 바로 이어서 진행을 하겠습니다. 지금 로 박사님께서 말씀하신 내용 중에 여러분들께서 의문사항이나 하시고 싶은 말씀 있으시면 말씀해 주십시오.
I've left you speechless. I'll be happy to answer any questions afterward. Thank you very much.
나중에 개인적으로 질문해 주셔도 답변을 해 주시겠답니다. 감사합니다.
그러면 오스왈드 박사님 모시겠습니다. 앞으로 해주실 강의 내용에서는 앞에 선생님과는 달리 영상 자료가 다양하게 많이 있기 때문에 한 번도 빠짐없이 끝까지 경청해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 앞에 지금 테이블을 치우지 않아도 될지.
I want to thank the Modern Dance Promotion Association, Won Soon Yuk and Min Suk Pak for inviting me today to talk about 30 years of change or 30 years of development in performance and choreography and technique. I have had for many years a warm feeling in my heart for Korea. Eleanor King was a very close friend of mine. When she returned from Korea, she shared her notes. She spent many hours telling me about her experiences here, and eventually her notes and her notebooks on her Korean experience came to the dance collection of the New York Public Library. Trisha Brown, distinguished, creative, one of the most successful modern dancers today, has said, "My dancing is unpredictable, unlikely, continuous, a kind of movement that has its own time." Unpredictable, unlikely, and continuous. Although speaking of her own choreography, what she has said characterizes for me the development of modern dance as an art form. Modern dance was and is unpredictable. Whether we are thinking of Isadora Duncan, who in the world of ballet discarded toe slippers for the bare feet of what was then called free dance, or Merce Cunningham, who rejected the expressive movement of Martha Graham for a movement system based on chance. It is unlikely when we think of the great ballets based on Asian ideals and philosophy created by Ruth St. Denis, a Californian, and Ted Shawn from Colorado. But above all, no matter what the changes in style and technique have been, and we will consider some of these changes today, modern dance has had a continuous development. It is movement that has its own time. Today, I want to talk about how modern dance changes, and in changing, often transforms itself into a style that almost seems new, but which is in reality a rebirth, a renewal, with a new movement, new philosophies that bring nourishment to this form of dance. The modern dance, which is now almost a century old. We will consider and see on videotape works of 3 choreographers that reflect these changes: Paul Taylor and Merce Cunningham and Tricia Brown. Before discussing these changes, which occurred in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, I want to speak briefly about the early days of modern dance and some of the contributions of the legacy that has come down to us from its great artist. Isadora Duncan scandalized Europe and America when she tried to recreate the Greek ideal of new image of a free body that would communicate the highest ideals and the most profound thoughts of man. She challenged the dance and theater world of her day by discarding the corset, shoes, ornate costumes, and she performed in a simple Greek dress using natural movement. Her movements were running, jumping, sitting, turning, walking, superbly performed, well rehearsed. Her legacy to us is this rediscovery of the natural, the use of bare feet, and the desire to express her inner self. St. Denis looked to the East, to Asian concepts and philosophy for inspiration. Ted Shawn, who joined her, enlarged her perspective with a belief that dancers should learn all types of movement worldwide. St. Denis also danced in bare feet, but she covered little floor space and used stylized movement modeled on Asian forms. Shawn's dancing was more robust. It is from him that we acquired the vigorous, athletic, rounded movement style covering floor space that is modern dance. They not only performed constantly as artists with a company that toured and set new standings for dance performance, but they created a school, Denis Shawn, from which the first generation of dancers, Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey, and Charles Wiedemann, were to come. The training given these dancers was astonishing. Ballet in bare feet, European modern dance, American Indian dance, Javanese, Japanese, Hindu dance, as well as lectures in philosophy, mythology, decor, and costume design. Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey, and Charles Wiedemann rebelled against Denis Shawn and so created the first transformation and renewal, the first traditional modern dance. They simply did not want to learn the styles of all the world's dance. Each began a search for movement that was personal, with no ethnic origin. Martha Graham, in whose tradition Merce Cunningham and Paul Taylor were nurtured, began testing the functions of the body to see what it could do in keeping with the general architecture of the body. In exploring this potential of the body, Graham devised a technique that has given dance new dimension with depths of understanding of motivation that is unmatched, I think, in any art. Graham produced new shapes of the body, and let's stop and think of what her dance looks like. The upper body will twist strongly against the lower. The arms twist against each other, or the legs will twist against the vertical spread of the upper body. A vital movement will meet with a sudden halt or a change of direction or mood. The body unfolding will meet with a sudden collapse. One can easily see that this movement style is in touch with the inner consciousness, the basic source of many of her great works. Communication of experience was her goal. And some 155 magnificent works stand as her achievement. Made new discoveries which transformed the look and the outer form of dance. It is important, I think, to note that although modern dance had strong schools of dance technique, it had no firmly established, codified vocabulary of movement, centuries old, like ballet, that had been tested by time. Modern dance belonged to the individual, and in the 1960s there was an explosion of individuality with a forceful search for new movement. Movement became an end in itself. Just as Graham's purpose was communication, the later rebellion's purpose was movement. The technical innovations of the past of Graham were accepted, but the emotional motivation was rejected because the dancers felt that this emotional motivation limited movement possibilities and thus limited the growth of the vocabulary. Merce Cunningham, Paul Taylor, and others of the avant-garde were primarily involved in seeking fresh combinations of movement, and each approached the problem in a different way. They developed new techniques, an emphasis on movement for movement's sake, with an incredible range and multiplicity of movement that developed. Movement that to us often seems dehumanized and has a continuity that is unfamiliar. The latter is found especially in Cunningham and less so in Taylor. In their works, they rejected no story. They rejected content. They rejected place. They rejected setting, and invited the audience to collaborate with them in the act of creation. Since finding the meaning of a work was not now up to the choreographer or the dancer who was performing it, but rather to each member of the audience to discover for himself. Let us turn now to the works themselves that will more or less illustrate these transformations. The first, that of the avant-garde, is found in Aureole, a work by Paul Taylor, and in Changing Steps by Merce Cunningham, and then a work from the postmodern revolution, Newark, by Trisha Brown. He, almost alone, of all the avant-garde artists, has not developed a formalized technique and has not created a school to train dancers in his own movement style. Taylor has been most free, perhaps, in accepting and often discarding ideas in terms of music, decor, and movement, unlike Cunningham, who has been consistently avant-garde in his use of music, decor, lighting, movement, and methods of presentation. Taylor was an art student, a member of the swimming team at Syracuse University, who came to dance almost accidentally by way of the Juilliard dance department, to be developed by Martha Graham, Pearl Lang, and Merce Cunningham. Aureole, which means halo of light, the kind of halo that angels have. The dance we'll see now was first performed early in his career in 1962 at Connecticut College, and I have chosen it because it shows that even at this early time, he had developed a movement vocabulary of great variety that was not to change basically as it served a wide variety of future choreographic purposes. He is concerned with form. He is a modern classicist. From the beginning, as a choreographer, he's been fascinated by the energy, the power and beauty of movement. He has humor, and he lets it flow in his choreography as he observes life's quirks and contradictions. Of great importance is Taylor's diversity. His choreographic range is as diverse as is his company, in which you find dancers that are tall, short, reed-like, and robust. Taylor's movement style involves skipping, sliding, prancing, slumping, and leaping sideways across the stage. His dancers move in big, muscular runs, lumbering slides, and ground-skimming leaps. The buoyant exuberance of his style combines speed, momentum, special conviction, and daring. There is a vibrancy in typical Taylor movements seen in this work, when performers extend themselves in precarious postures or propel themselves across the stage in a happy, broad, graceful flapping of the arms. Leaps become new formations of the legs in mid-air as the dancers tuck their feet beneath him. His movements are devoid of preparation, have fluidity, and speed with the choreography for men that is muscular, quick, and eloquently masculine. Aureole speaks with uncommon eloquence as it translates the wonder, the breadth, and the poetry of Handel's music. Aureole is set for two men and three women dressed in simple leotards with short net skirts on the women, who inhabit a world that seems full of light and playfulness, with an interaction between the dancers in which they sort of smile amusingly at each other. I want to describe a little bit the scenario, and this is difficult to do. The first movement opens with a man, center stage, cradling a woman in his arms, while two women at either side of the stage begin to dance toward the center and back again. The man sets the woman down and leaves. They return and continue to dance, as if in some ebullient atmosphere, until the end, when all move in a diagonal, walking across stage. The second movement begins with a solo for a bare-chested male dancer, which is a sustained adagio variation. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No. Which is a sustained adagio variation, characterized by one leg extended behind him as he reaches to one side. Eventually, the first man and three women enter again, and after a few moments begin a brief little dance characterized by quick stepping exits of the women and heroic jumps by the man, who in mid-air again tucks his feet beneath him. A duet between the second man and one woman follows, which includes circling of the other dancers, an embrace, and ends with a woman cradled in the first man's arm. The ebullience of the first movement is found again in the third, which is all bound and rebound of dancers, happily paddling through space with broad arcs of their arms. Each dancer crosses and recrosses the stage with exits and entrances that lead to the general elan and exuberance of the conclusion of the ballet. Now we will see a videotape of Oriole, which was done by which was done by Dance in America series, broadcast in 1981. turn to Merce Cunningham, our second avant-garde choreographer, and I hope you're still interested in the avant-garde. Merce used methods of chance or accidental blind choice. He wrote movements possible for the various parts of the body on pieces of paper and then selected them at random from a bag. One for the head, one for the arms, one for the legs, one for the torso, and so on. Then he varied these movements by selecting the duration of each movement and the extremity to which each movement could be carried. Eventually, he worked out charts of the possibilities of time, space, and movement, and he tossed a coin to find out which movement, what space or extremity it would have, and what time or duration would be given to it. He also made use of the silent body, with stillness having a definite time value. His philosophy can be summed up as any movement can be material for dance, any procedure is valid compositional method, any part of the body can be used. Music, costume, decor, and lighting have their own logic and own identities separate from the dancing and should be created separately. They should be put together at the time of performance. Any dancer in the company might be a soloist. Any space might be danced in. Dancing can be about anything, but fundamentally and primarily it is about the body and its movements, beginning with walking. We have here the foundations of a great change, a great revolution. Cunningham was from the west coast of the United States, was trained at the Cornish School in the state of Washington, and was a member of the Martha Graham Company, where he remained until the mid-40s. Cunningham's movement style is difficult to describe. It is not the sequences of modern dance familiar to us, organized into forms that we have known, but rather seems to be fragmented, almost illogical, choreographic encounters or explorations. It presents us with a splendid display of dancing moving past us, dancing of such complexity, and at such a pace we can hardly grasp it. His dancers are elegant, splendidly trained artists, impeccably performing stunning group designs that are never indulged in or forced, but arrived at and departed from simply without any change of emphasis. His choreography draws attention not to a single event or person, but presents a number of things to watch. A single gestural detail can have as much force as the most energized succession of movements. His dancers use space without getting into each other's way. Dancers work in groups and pairs, but often their actions cancel out each other or lead back to where they started from, instead of resulting in real change. His dancers often do not acknowledge each other on stage. Frequently, a pose is established and then broken with something unexpected. His dancers must be able to change direction without a moment's hesitation, to know how to stand still while maintaining a sense of choreographic continuity. This choreography has its own classicism, with dances that have grown increasingly swift, eliminating the obvious transitional movements. Cunningham has responded to his dancers' technical gifts with more intricate unison and support work. Changing steps, an exceptionally fine work, was first performed in March 1973 at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York. The version I will show you is a new video version, a collaboration between Merce Cunningham and his videographer, Elliot Kaplan. It is his attempt at a new form of presenting dance as a means of stimulating new responses, new connections in you, his audience. The videotape is a careful, deliberate amalgamation of footage made in several places, on a country estate, in a barn, on a stage, punctuated by old studio footage and overexposed, blurred images of dance figures. Although the scene shifts, the choreography is continuous and is not repeated. The opening sequence is a solo with bold lunges, seen in the shadows of a sunlit barn. A quartet of dancers, 2 couples, do 2 duets, seemingly performed in slow motion, which seems to be a study in balance and counterbalance. The dance moves inside, joins with other dancers, and continues with a duet of the women. Later, a male dancer jumps and quickly moves around the barn, while a female dancer, in front of a background of grass and rocks, performs shoulder wiggles, dancing with a dreamy air. A playful trio, outside the building, yields to one inside. Then briefly, on a brilliantly lit stage, all these dancers dance a snatch of the previous trio. Later, while a dance by a quintet is unfolding in the barn, in the distance, a small figure can be seen doing a solo. Then behind the quartet, which is only partially visible, 2 duets take place. One, a serene dialogue for 2 women facing each other. We then see this half-glimpse duet performed by 4 pairs of women. The dancing is extraordinary. We can assume perhaps that the shots of nature at the beginning and the end are to remind us about change and growth, and the fact that dance, like nature, is never the same from moment to moment. I don't know how much of this you want to see. It's about 24 minutes. I'll tell you, if you will call out when you think you've had enough, I'll turn it off. Thank you. We're ready?
Thank you.